The message left Earth at the speed of light, but hope traveled much slower. Chancellor Minho stood in the command center beneath the city of Busan, watching the screens with tired eyes. The scarring fleet had been spotted 3 days ago, 200 warships from a coalition of species that saw Earth as nothing more than easy meat. A young world, a small fleet, a species that had only been in space for 40 years. Minho had sent the distress call to the Galactic Concord on the first day. He had begged. He had used every diplomatic word he knew. He had explained that Earth had 12 warships and the enemy had 200. He had asked for help the way a drowning man asks for a hand. The Concord debated for 6 days. 6 days while the scarring fleet moved closer. 6 days while mothers packed bags and fathers carried children to underground shelters. 6 days while volunteers who had never touched a weapon lined up outside military bases and asked to fight. On the 7th day, the Concord sent its answer. It was 1 sentence long. Earth's conflict does not meet the threshold for collective intervention. We wish you endurance. Minho read the message 3 times. Then he sat down, put his face in his hands, and was silent for a long time. When he stood up again, something in his eyes had changed. It was not anger. It was something quieter and much harder. It was the look of a man who understood for the first time that he and his people were truly alone. But they were not. 6,000 light-years away, on a green world called Valuna, a young speaker named Ranu sat in the council chamber and watched the same human broadcasts that the rest of the galaxy was ignoring. He saw a woman in Seoul handing out water bottles to soldiers who looked like children. He saw an old man building a wall out of broken concrete and car doors, stacking it with shaking hands. He saw a girl, no more than 10 years old, standing on a rooftop, holding a flag that she had made from a bedsheet. And on it she had written 1 word, in clumsy letters, here. As if she was telling the universe where to find them. As if she believed someone was looking. Ranu was not a warrior. His people were not warriors. The Valoon were known for medicine, art, and patience. Their fleet was built for exploration and transport, not combat. They had 60 ships. Against the Scarring's 200, it was almost nothing. But Ranu stood before the Valoon Council and spoke. He did not give a long speech. He said only this: they are asking for help. No one is answering. If we do not go, who will? The vote was close, 31 in favor, 29 against. It passed by 2 voices. 2 voices that changed the history of 2 worlds. The Valoon sent everything. Every ship. Every pilot who volunteered. A fleet commander named Kale, young and serious with calm dark eyes, led them across 6,000 light-years in the fastest journey the Valoon had ever made. When his ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and appeared in Earth's orbit, the human fleet, 12 battered ships arranged in a desperate line, turned their sensors toward the newcomers and did not believe what they saw. Kale opened a channel. His voice was steady. He spoke in the common galactic language, and every human, on every ship, and every screen on Earth heard him say 5 words. You are not alone. We stand. The Battle of Seoul lasted 7 days. It was not a clean fight. It was not heroic in the way stories make wars sound. It was chaos and fire and people dying in the dark. The Scarring hit hard and fast, expecting to break through Earth's tiny defense in hours. They did not expect the Valoon. They did not expect 60 transport ships that had been hastily fitted with weapons, flying directly into the enemy line and refusing to move. They did not expect human pilots ramming their own damaged ships into enemy cruisers because they had run out of missiles and had nothing left but the ship itself. A boy named Tejo, 17 years old and still in his cadet uniform, flew his first combat mission on the third day. His hands shook so badly that he could barely grip the controls. His squadron leader was killed in the first 5 minutes. Tejo took command because there was no one else. He flew for 14 hours straight, and when he landed, he sat in the cockpit and cried until someone came to carry him out. The Velans suffered terribly. Their ships were not built for this. Hull after hull cracked open under enemy fire. Kale lost half his fleet in the first 3 days. When his own flagship was damaged, he transferred to a smaller vessel and kept fighting. On the 5th day, the Valoon held a defensive line around Earth's moon, while human ground forces fought a brutal battle against scarring troops that had landed in East Asia. The Valoon ships above took hit after hit, absorbing fire that would have reached the planet's surface. On the 7th day, the scarring broke. Their fleet, bled dry by losses they had never expected, turned and ran. Earth's sky was full of burning wreckage and the silence that comes after terrible noise. The cost was enormous. 40% of the Valoon fleet was destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of humans were dead. Cities were in ruins. The world was scarred in ways that would take decades to heal. And the galaxy, the great galactic concord, with its 1,000-member species and its vast fleets, said nothing. No congratulations, no aid, no apology. Just silence. 3 weeks after the battle, Chancellor Minho met Elder Ronu on the steps of a destroyed embassy in Seoul. Minho was dying. The bombardment had filled his lungs with toxic dust, and the doctor said he had weeks left. He was thin and pale, and held himself up with a cane. Ronu walked to him slowly, his forearms open in the Valoon gesture of deep respect. Minho took Ronu's hand. He held it tightly, and with the last real strength he had, he said words that would be carved into every human warship built for the next 40 years. We will never forget who came, and we will never forget who didn't. Ronu held the old man's hand and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. They stood together in the ruins, 2 leaders of 2 wounded peoples, and the galaxy moved on around them as if none of it had mattered. But it mattered. It mattered more than anyone knew. Earth did not forget. That was the thing the galaxy failed to understand. Other species might have raged. They might have made threats, or demanded justice, or launched a war of revenge against the Concord that had abandoned them. Humans did none of these things. Instead, they did something that made the rest of the galaxy far more uncomfortable. They went quiet. They rebuilt, and they remembered. In the first 5 years after the Battle of Seoul, Earth buried its dead and repaired its cities. The reconstruction was slow and painful. Entire coastlines had been scorched. 3 major cities were gone. The economy had collapsed. But people worked. They worked with a focus that was almost frightening, because every single one of them carried the same knowledge in their chest, like a second heartbeat. The galaxy had watched them almost die, and had done nothing. A young officer named Do-hyun graduated from the Naval Academy during those early years. He had been a child during the battle, hiding in a shelter beneath Incheon, while the sky burned orange above him. He remembered the sound of Valoon ships breaking apart in orbit, a deep, low groaning that traveled through the atmosphere and shook the walls. He remembered his mother holding him and whispering that it would be okay, and he remembered knowing, even at that age, that she was lying. Do-hyun did not join the fleet for glory. He joined because he never wanted to hear that sound again. He never wanted his people to need someone else's ships to die for them. He rose fast. He was calm in crisis, brilliant in planning, and completely unwilling to waste a single life. By the age of 38, he was the youngest admiral in human history. The fleet he commanded looked nothing like the desperate 12 ships that had fought the scarring. Earth had built something new. Warships that were fast, heavily armed, and designed by engineers who understood what it felt like to be outgunned. Every hull carried the same inscription, in small letters near the bridge, "We remember." While Do-hyun built the fleet, a woman named Hana entered politics. She had grown up in a reconstruction zone outside what used to be Daejeon, playing in the shadows of half-rebuilt buildings and listening to her grandmother tell stories about the day the Velun came. Hana was soft-spoken and patient, but underneath that patience was something as hard as stone. She became a council member at 29, a senator at 34, and Chancellor of Earth at 41. She was the youngest person to hold that office, and she carried it with a grace that hid an iron memory. The Galactic Concord noticed Earth's growth the way a person notices a small crack in a wall, first with mild interest, then with growing concern. Then tripled. Its technology advanced faster than any species in the Concord had predicted. Human scientists worked alongside Valoon researchers, blending human physics with Valoon biology to create things neither species could have built alone. New engines, new shields, new sensors that could see deeper into space than anything the Concord possessed. Earth and the Valoon signed the Sol-Valoon Compact, a permanent alliance that bound the two species in military defense, scientific research, and cultural exchange. Joint academies were built on both worlds. A boy named Jinho grew up attending one, training beside Valoon cadets, learning to fly in mixed squadrons where human reflexes and Valoon precision made something greater than either alone. Jinho was fast, reckless, and grinning most of the time. His instructors called him a disaster. His squadron mates called him the best pilot they had ever seen. Both things were true. A young scientist named Salmon studied at the same academy, but on the research side. She was quiet, where Jinho was loud. Careful, where he was wild. She had a gift for seeing connections between things that seemed unrelated. Valoon biotech and human quantum mechanics, alien chemistry, and earth engineering. She published her first paper at 22, and was leading a research division by 28. She worked constantly, sleeping in her lab more often than her quarters, driven by a purpose she rarely spoke about, but everyone understood. She wanted to make sure that if Earth ever faced another threat, it would have the tools to survive. Primus Oton, the current head of the Galactic Concord, watched all of this with increasing nervousness. He was a politician, and politicians understood leverage. Earth was becoming powerful, and powerful species that held grudges were dangerous. He sent diplomatic messages to Chancellor Hana, invitations to rejoin the Concord's inner circle, offers of trade agreements, promises of partnership and mutual benefit. Hana read every message carefully and responded to each one with perfect politeness. She thanked the Concord for its interest. She agreed to fair trade on neutral terms, and she declined every invitation to return to the fold. She never raised her voice. She never mentioned the past. She simply said no, again and again, with a smile that never reached her eyes. A Concord diplomat named Dury was assigned as a permanent envoy to Earth. He was mid-ranking, practical, and at first, he thought the assignment was a punishment. Over the years, he changed his mind. He walked the streets of rebuilt cities and saw the memorials. Not angry monuments, but quiet ones. Gardens where buildings had burned. Walls with names of the dead. A museum in Seoul that had one room dedicated to the Velen, filled with letters that human children had written to Velen families who had lost someone in the battle. Dury read those letters and felt something shift inside his chest. He began to understand that Earth's distance from the Concord was not about politics. It was about something much deeper. Then the signals began to disappear. Solman's Deep Space Sensor Array, the most advanced detection system ever built, a joint human-Velen project, positioned at the edge of explored space, started picking up anomalies. Stars on the galaxy's outer rim were going dark. Not exploding, not collapsing, just going dark, as if someone had turned them off. One by one, system after system, a pattern that moved inward like a slow, patient tide. Soman ran the data 7 times before she believed it. Then she sat alone in her lab for an hour, staring at the screen, feeling a cold weight settle in her stomach. She called Admiral Dohian on a secure channel. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a long silence. "How fast is it moving?" he asked. "At current speed, it reaches Concord space in 18 months. It reaches us in 3 years." Another silence. "Does the Concord know?" "If their sensors are as good as ours, yes. If not, they will soon." Dohian closed his eyes. He thought of his mother in the shelter. He thought of the inscription on his ship's hull. He thought of Chancellor Hana and Elder Ronu, and every person who had spent 40 years building something strong enough to protect what they loved. "Give it a name," he said quietly. Soman looked at the data, the empty systems, the dead stars, the advancing silence. "The Hollow," she said. "The first world to die was called Vesca. It was a border planet in Concord space, home to 11 million people, farmers mostly, living quiet lives under a purple sky. One morning, their communications stopped. The Concord thought it was a technical failure. They sent a repair team. The repair team went silent. They sent a military scout. The scout dropped out of faster-than-light travel, looked at what was left of Vesca, and the pilot began to scream. The planet was still there. It hung in space exactly where it had always been. But everything else was gone. The atmosphere had been stripped away. The oceans were dry basins of cracked rock. The cities, the forests, the fields, the people, all of it was gone. Even the color was wrong. The planet's surface was gray, as if something had sucked the life out of the soil itself. The scout pilot later described it as looking at a corpse. Not destroyed, just emptied. 2 more worlds fell in the same week. The same pattern. No explosions, no debris fields, no enemy fleet in orbit. Just silence, and then nothing. The Concord sent a battle group of 300 ships to hold the next system in the path. They formed a defensive line and waited. What came was not a fleet. It was a wall. A vast, dark mass that moved through space like ink spreading through water, blotting out the stars behind it. It had no shape, no structure, no center. It was simply there, and it was enormous. The battle group opened fire. Energy weapons hit the surface of the mass and were absorbed like raindrops falling into a lake. Missiles detonated against it, and the explosions were swallowed. The darkness kept moving. When it reached the first ship, the ship did not explode. It went dark. Its power died. Its hull began to crumble, as if it were aging 1,000 years in seconds. The crew had no time to scream. Within 6 hours, the entire battle group was gone, and the Hollow moved on, unchanged, unslowed, as if the 300 ships had never existed. Primus Otan received the report in his council chamber, and did not speak for a full minute. Around him, Concord representatives were shouting, arguing, blaming each other. Some demanded more ships. Some demanded retreat. Some suggested negotiation, as if the Hollow were a species that could be reasoned with. Otan sat in the center of the noise and felt something he had never felt before in his long political career. He felt helpless. The Hollow was not an army. It was a force of nature, a cosmic event that fed on energy and matter, that absorbed everything it touched, that adapted to every weapon used against it. It could not be scared. It could not be bribed. It could not be voted away. It simply advanced, and everything in its path ceased to exist. Over the next 3 months, 14 more worlds fell. Refugee ships flooded into the Concord's inner systems, carrying millions of displaced people with empty eyes and trembling hands. The Concord's economy buckled under the strain. Its military was bleeding ships faster than it could build them, and the Hollow kept coming, steady and patient, as if it had all the time in the universe. Otan knew what he had to do. He had known since the first report. He had simply been too proud to admit it. He called Liaison Dury home from Earth and gave him the mission personally. Dury stood in Otan's office and listened to the instructions, and his face went through several expressions: shock, then shame, then a kind of bitter acceptance. He was being sent to beg. He was being sent to the people the Concord had abandoned 40 years ago, to ask them to save the Concord now. "They will not forget what we did," Dury said quietly. "I know," Otan replied. "Go anyway." Dury traveled to Earth alone, in a single diplomatic shuttle. He was escorted to Chancellor Hana's office in the new Capitol building in Seoul, a structure built on the same ground where the old embassy had stood, where Chancellor Minho had held Elder Ranu's hand and made his promise. Dury had been to this office many times over the years, but today it felt different. Today the walls seemed to press in on him. Hana sat across from him. She was calm, as always. Her hands were folded on the desk. Behind her, through the tall window, the city stretched out, gleaming and whole, rebuilt from ashes by people who had sworn never to be weak again. Dury looked at that city and felt the full weight of what he was about to ask. He told her everything: the Hollow, the lost worlds, the shattered fleets, the projections that said the Concord would collapse within 2 years, and the final, unavoidable truth that the Hollow would not stop at the Concord's borders. Eventually, it would reach Earth too. Hana listened without interrupting. Her expression did not change. When Dury finished, there was a silence that stretched between them like a held breath. Then Hana asked a single question: "How many civilians need evacuation?" Dury's composure cracked. He looked down at his hands and pressed his lips together hard, because the question was not about strategy or politics or leverage. It was about people. She had heard everything: the scale of the threat, the military implications, the fact that the Concord had abandoned her world. And her first question was about saving lives. He had to take several breaths before he could answer. Hana called an emergency session of the Earth Assembly that night. The debate lasted 12 hours. Admirals and senators and scientists argued until their voices were raw. The case for intervention was strategic. Admiral Do-hyun stood before the assembly and laid it out clearly. The Hollow was coming regardless. Fighting it at the Concord's border was better than fighting it at Earth's doorstep. Waiting would only make it stronger. But the emotional argument was the one that shook the room. Captain Taeho, 40 years older than the shaking cadet who had cried in his cockpit, stood before the assembly with his scarred face and his tired eyes, and spoke bluntly. "They left us to die," he said. "Every person in this room knows someone who did not survive because the Concord chose to do nothing. I am not standing here to pretend that doesn't matter." The room was silent. Many heads nodded. Then a hologram flickered to life at the front of the chamber. Elder Ronu, old now, his forearms thin and trembling, appeared from the Velund homeworld. He had requested to speak, and Hana had granted it. The room quieted instantly. Every human in that chamber had grown up hearing this name. Ronu spoke slowly. His voice was soft, but it carried. "I understand your anger," he said. "We share it. We lost our people too, fighting beside you. But I want you to remember something. 40 years ago, my people chose to come. We chose to stand with Earth, not because it was smart, not because we would gain something, but because it was right. That choice is the most important thing my people have ever done. It is the thing that defines us. Do not let the Concord's failure define you. Do not let them take from you the thing that makes you who you are." The chamber was absolutely still. Chancellor Hana stood. She looked at the assembly, at the veterans, the scientists, the pilots, the diplomats. She looked at Taeho, who had closed his eyes. She looked at Do-hyun, who stood straight and ready. She looked at the hologram of Ranu, who had crossed 6,000 light-years to fight for a world that was not his own. "We go," she said. The human fleet arrived at the Concorde's front line like a fist closing. 400 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, their hulls dark and angular, built for one purpose and hiding nothing about it. Behind them came the Valoon fleet, smaller, lighter, but upgraded with 40 years of shared technology. Together, they filled the sky above the Concorde staging world of Talrin, and every species watching from the ground or from orbit went silent. The Concorde commanders had seen images of human ships. They had read intelligence reports. They had studied the numbers. But seeing them in person was something else entirely. These were predators, sleek, fast, and radiating a quiet menace that made even the largest Concorde dreadnoughts look clumsy. A Concorde captain later wrote in his report that looking at the human fleet felt like standing next to a sleeping animal that he was very glad was on his side. Admiral Do-hyun took overall command without ceremony. He boarded the Concorde's command station, reviewed their tactical data, and began issuing orders within the hour. The Concorde commanders, who had been arguing among themselves for months, deferred without a single objection. There was no resentment. There was only relief. Someone had arrived who knew what to do. Jin-ho flew in the Vanguard Squadron, the tip of the spear. He was 26 years old and the best pilot in the combined fleet, and everyone knew it, including him. He sat in his cockpit, with his feet up on the console, grinning at his Velen wingmate through the canopy, looking for all the world like a man about to go on a pleasant trip rather than fly into the end of everything. But his hands were steady on the controls, and when the order came, his grin disappeared, and something sharp and focused took its place. Somin set up her research laboratory on Do-hyun's flagship. She had brought a team of 30 human and Valoon scientists working together, and she had one goal: find a way to kill the Hollow permanently, not slow it, not push it back, kill it. She worked 20-hour days, running simulations, testing theories, burning through ideas, and discarding them one after another. The Hollow absorbed energy. It adapted to weapons. It learned from every attack. Fighting it with conventional weapons was like trying to drain an ocean with a cup. The first engagement was at the Nori Corridor, a narrow channel of space between two dense nebulae where the Hollow was funneled into a thinner formation. Do-hyun chose it deliberately. He wanted to see how the enemy moved, how it reacted, what it did when it was hurt. Captain Taeho commanded the center line, the ships that would take the heaviest fire. Taeho had not wanted to come. He had told Do-hyun plainly that he thought the Concorde deserved what it got. But he had come anyway, because Do-hyun asked. And because somewhere beneath his anger, Taeho knew that the people dying in the Hollow's path were not the politicians who had abandoned Earth. They were farmers and children and ordinary people who had never made that choice. The battle at the Nori Corridor was a nightmare. The Hollow hit the defensive line like a wave hitting a wall, and the wall cracked. Ships went dark as the Hollow's tendrils reached them, power systems failing, hulls aging and crumbling, crews dying in seconds. Taeho held his line for 9 hours. He lost 3 ships, watched them go dark one by one, knowing there was nothing he could do for the people inside. But he bought time. Behind his line, civilian transports carrying 2 million refugees escaped into safer space. The second engagement was worse. The Hollow had adapted. It moved differently, splitting into smaller masses that flanked the fleet, targeting engines and communications first. Kale, the old Velen commander who had fought at the Battle of Sol 40 years ago, led a ground defense on a Velen colony world directly in the Hollow's path. Human Marines fought beside Velen soldiers in the streets, while the darkness ate the horizon behind them. They could not save the world, but they saved 80% of its people, loading them onto ships while the rearguard held the line. The two species bled together, again, just as they had 40 years before, and something unexpected happened. The Concorde species, who had watched from the sidelines for decades, began to fight harder. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was inspiration. Maybe it was simply that watching humans and Valoon die for worlds that were not their own made it impossible to stand by. Concorde captains volunteered for the most dangerous missions. Concorde soldiers fought in the ground engagements. Slowly, unevenly, the alliance grew. Soman found the answer on the 43rd day of the war. She had not slept in 3 days. Her eyes were red, and her hands trembled from caffeine and exhaustion. But the data was clear. The hollow fed on energy, all forms of energy, kinetic, thermal, electromagnetic, nuclear. It absorbed everything, except one thing. Resonant gravitational pulses at a specific frequency disrupted the hollow's ability to absorb. It was not a weapon exactly. It was more like a frequency that made the hollow unable to eat. If they could generate a pulse large enough, they could starve it, force it to retreat and collapse on itself. Generating a gravitational pulse large enough to affect the entire hollow mass required detonating a chain of modified reactors simultaneously inside the hollow's core. Not at its edges, inside it. Someone would have to fly into the heart of the hollow, plant the charges, and trigger the detonation. The chances of getting out were almost zero. Do-Yun called for volunteers. He expected to wait. He expected hesitation. Instead, every human ship in the fleet signaled readiness within 30 seconds. Then every Velen ship. And then, one by one, Concorde ships began signaling too. Dury, who had been embedded with the human fleet since the war began, requested permission to join the insertion team. Hana granted it. Taeho was chosen to lead. Jinho would fly the lead ship. Soman insisted on going to calibrate the detonation in real time. The frequency had to be precise, and she trusted no one else with the numbers. Soman won. The insertion fleet, 40 ships, human and Valoon and Concorde, punched into the hollow's core. What they found inside was beyond anything they had prepared for. Light died. Sensors screamed with data that made no sense. The darkness was not empty. It was thick, pressing against the hulls like deep water, and the ships began to age. Paint peeled, metal groaned, systems flickered and failed, and came back and failed again. Taeho guided the team forward by instinct and iron will. Jinho flew through conditions that should have killed him 6 times over, weaving between tendrils of darkness that reached for his ship like fingers. Soman sat in the lab, watching her instruments, calling out adjustments in a voice that was steady, even as the walls around her cracked. They planted the charges. Soman calibrated. The countdown began. Kale's ship took a fatal hit on the way out. A tendril of darkness wrapped around the Valoon vessel and began to crush it. Kale ordered his crew to the escape pods immediately. His officers refused. He ordered them again, and this time his voice left no room for argument. As the pods launched, Kale turned his dying ship broadside and used its last power to shield Do-Hyun's flagship for the second tendril. In his final transmission, his voice was calm. 40 years ago, I told your world it was not alone. I meant it then, I mean it now. The charges detonated. The gravitational pulse tore through the hollow like a sound through glass. The darkness shuddered. It contracted. A sound erupted across every frequency. Not a scream exactly, but something vast and agonized. The sound of something that had never been hurt before, feeling pain for the first time. The hollow collapsed inward, folding on itself, retreating, breaking apart. Jinho flew the escape run, with half his instruments dead, and his cockpit cracking around him. Taeho held on to a railing with both hands, as the flagship lurched through the collapsing darkness. Salmon watched her data and whispered, "It's working, it's working. They made it out. Not all of them, not whole, but they made it out, and behind them the hollow was dying, pulling away from the galaxy's edge like a tide going out, starving and broken and retreating into the deep black." The silence after the hollow's retreat was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. For 3 days, the combined fleet hung in space above the last battlefield, and nobody moved. Crews sat at their stations and stared at their screens, watching the darkness pull away from the galaxy's edge like a wound closing in reverse. Some people cheered. Most did not. Most just sat in the quiet and tried to understand that they were alive, that it was over, that the thing which had eaten worlds and swallowed fleets and turned stars into nothing was finally retreating into the deep black where it had come from. Tejo sat in the medical bay of the flagship, with bandages around his ribs and a bruise across half his face. He had broken 4 bones during the escape from the hollow's core. He had refused painkillers until every member of his team had been treated first. A medic had argued with him. Tejo had given the medic a look that ended the argument immediately. Now he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, and he did not feel victory. He felt tired. He felt old. He felt the weight of every ship he had watched go dark, every crew he had been unable to save. He thought about Kale, the quiet Valen who had shielded the flagship with his own dying vessel. And he closed his eyes and pressed his fist against his chest, which was the only way he knew how to grieve. Jinho was in surgery. He had lost his left arm below the elbow when a section of his cockpit had collapsed during the escape run. He had flown the last 12 minutes with one hand, steering through collapsing darkness while blood ran down his side, and he had landed the ship on the flagship's deck with a precision that made the deck crew stare in disbelief. When they pulled him from the cockpit, he looked at his missing arm, looked at the deck chief and said, "I'm going to need a really good prosthetic, because I'm not done flying." Then he passed out. Salmon sat in her laboratory, surrounded by data she had not yet organized, and wrote a single line in her research log. It worked. Then she put her head down on the desk and slept for 14 hours straight. When she woke up, she began writing her full report, and she made a decision that would matter more than anything she had done during the war itself. She would publish everything, every formula, every calculation, every piece of data about the Hollow's weakness. She would share it freely with every species in the galaxy, without restriction, without cost. If the Hollow ever returned, no one would face it without the knowledge to fight back. The galaxy counted its losses slowly, the way a person counts injuries after a fall. Thousands of ships destroyed. Millions of lives lost. Dozens of worlds scarred beyond recovery. The Concord's outer territories were devastated. Refugee camps stretched across 100 systems. The economic damage would take generations to repair. And the Valoon mourned Kale. On their homeworld, they built a memorial in the center of their capital, a simple stone column with his words engraved in both Valoon script and human text. "You are not alone. We stand." 3 weeks after the Hollow's retreat, Primus Otan traveled to Earth. He came alone, in a single ship, without guards or advisors or ceremony. He was escorted to the Great Hall of the Earth Assembly, where Chancellor Hana waited with the full council behind her. The hall was packed. Every seat was filled. Veterans of the war sat beside politicians, scientists beside soldiers. Dohyun stood at Hana's right side, his uniform still carrying the burn marks from the final battle. Tejo was there, leaning on a cane. Jinho was there, his left sleeve pinned at the elbow, his new prosthetic not yet fitted. Somin was there, dark circles under her eyes, her research log tucked under her arm. Otan walked to the center of the hall and stood before them all. He was tall and proud by nature, a politician who had spent his life projecting strength. But today his shoulders were low and his eyes were heavy. And when he spoke, his voice carried no performance. 40 years ago, he said, the Galactic Concord received a call for help from this world. We debated for 6 days while your people fought and died. And then we sent a message that I have carried in my memory ever since, because it is the worst thing my government has ever done. He paused. We told you to endure. We wished you endurance, as if words could replace ships, as if indifference could be made polite with good grammar. He looked at Hana directly. Today I am not here to explain. I am not here to justify. I am here to say that we were wrong, that we failed you, that when you called, we should have come, and we did not. Then Otan did something that made the entire hall go still. He bowed. Not a diplomatic bow, not a gesture of courtesy between equals. He bowed deeply, folding his body nearly in half, in the way his species reserved for the most profound acknowledgement of wrong. It was a bow of shame, given freely, without being asked for. The hall was silent for a long time. Hana stepped forward. She looked at Otan for a moment, at this proud man bent before her, carrying the guilt of a government that had chosen comfort over courage. She thought about Minho, who had died with Valoon dust in his lungs and a promise on his lips. She thought about Ronu, who had sent his entire fleet because a 10-year-old girl had written "here" on a bedsheet. She thought about Kale, who had died saying the same words he had spoken 40 years ago. We didn't come because you deserved it, she said. We came because someone taught us what it means to show up when it matters. She looked toward the Valoon delegation. Elder Ronu was there by hologram, watching from his homeworld, too frail now to travel. His forearms were folded in his lap. His eyes were wet. He said nothing. He did not need to. Otan took Hana's hand, and something shifted, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but quietly, the way a bone begins to heal. It was not forgiveness exactly. It was something more complicated and more honest. It was the beginning of trust, offered not because it was earned, but because withholding it would have cost more than giving it. In the weeks that followed, Liaison Dury wrote a document that would be read across the galaxy for generations. He called it a testament to Earth. In it, he did not write about strategy, or fleet sizes, or weapons technology. He wrote about human medics who had treated wounded Concord soldiers before their own, because the Concord soldiers were hurt worse. He wrote about Jinho giving his oxygen mask to a Velen cadet during a hull breach, and breathing vacuum for 40 seconds until rescue arrived. He wrote about Teho sitting beside a dying alien soldier from a species that had voted to abandon Earth, holding the soldier's hand and whispering soft words in a language the soldier could not understand, because the comfort mattered more than the words. Dury wrote, "We asked ourselves why the humans came. We looked for strategy. We looked for leverage. We looked for ambition. We found none of these things. We found only this. They remembered what it felt like to be alone, and they refused to let anyone else feel it." The Sol Velen Compact opened its doors. A new alliance formed. Not the old Concord, but something built on a different foundation. The principle was simple. When someone calls, you answer. Earth did not lead with arrogance. The Valoon did not demand recognition. They simply set the standard and invited others to meet it. Many did. Jinho returned to the Joint Academy as an instructor, his new prosthetic arm gleaming under the training lights. And he taught a new generation of pilots, human, Valoon, and Concord, to fly together. Somin published her research and watched it spread across the galaxy like seeds in wind. Do-hyun retired quietly and traveled to the Valoon homeworld, where he visited Kale's memorial and sat before it for an entire afternoon without speaking, because some debts cannot be spoken, only felt. Years passed. The galaxy healed, slowly and imperfectly, the way galaxies do. And then, on a quiet morning, a signal arrived from the far edge of known space. It was weak and broken and full of static, and it came from a species so small and so new that most of the galaxy had never heard of them. They were under attack. They were outnumbered. They had no allies, no powerful friends, no one to call. Their message was simple and desperate, and it said only, "Please, is anyone there?" The signal reached Earth. It reached the Velun homeworld. It reached the New Alliance. Within hours, a fleet was assembled. Human ships, Velun ships, Concord ships, flying together under a single banner. Admiral Jinho, older now, steadier, with gray in his hair and calm in his eyes, sat in the command chair and plotted the course. As the fleet entered faster than light travel, he opened a channel to the frightened species on the other end of that desperate signal. He thought about Kale. He thought about Ronu. He thought about a girl on a rooftop with a bedsheet flag. He thought about a one-armed pilot who had refused to stop flying, and a scientist who had given her work to the galaxy for free, and a scarred captain who had held a stranger's hand in the dark. Then he transmitted 5 words, the same 5 words that had been spoken to Earth 40 years ago, when the sky was burning, and the galaxy had turned away, and a single Velen officer had crossed 6,000 light-years to say the only thing that mattered. "You are not alone. We stand." And this time, the whole galaxy stood with him.